Great, thank you, Sierra. Good afternoon and welcome to the Capture Higher Ed webinar, Leveraging Financial Aid to Drive Enrollment and Maximize Net Tuition Revenue. My name is Derek Hartle, and I'm going to be your host for this afternoon's session. Here at Capture, I serve as a senior enrollment advisor, but prior to joining the team, I spent the previous 20 years working on a college campus in Northeast Iowa, most recently as vice president for enrollment. So I've been on the campus side of this particular conversation not that long ago. I'm excited to be joined today by two enrollment professionals who have a wealth of experience in the industry. Gretchen Bree is a senior enrollment advisor here at Capture who has been with the company since 2014. Prior to Capture, Gretchen worked as a director of admissions for nearly 12 years on a college campus in Illinois. And we're also thrilled to be joined by Leanne Hughes, Vice President for Enrollment Management at Illinois Wesleyan University in Bloomington, Illinois. Over the course of her career, Leanne has served as the Chief Enrollment Officer at 3 different institutions, most recently at Illinois Wesleyan since 2016. What do we plan to accomplish today? I'd like to begin my comments today with a brief overview of Capture Higher Ed, kind of who we are, what we do, and how we support partners. I feel strongly that one of the most important pieces of developing strategies surrounding the leveraging of financial aid as a recruitment tool is to establish institutional measures of success. And I'm not just talking about the enrollment or revenue goals that are established at the beginning of the cycle. At the end of the year, what will signify a win? What metrics will need to be met in order for all the hard work done by your enrollment team throughout the year to be viewed as successful? I'm also going to take a few minutes to walk through Capture's aid and enroll models so that you're able to see the data that can be provided by these predictive tools. You'll be able to see how these models are designed, how they perform to best support your institutional measures of success. We will then spend some time hearing from Gretchen and Leanne as they're going to talk through some strategies they have considered or implemented before and or after aid awards are released. And then finally, we'll wrap up what we've learned before we adjourn for the day. So before we get started, I do want to mention that here at Capture, we partner with colleges and universities to support and assist enrollment and advancement teams in making personalized, data-driven, timely, and measured connections with their constituents in order to make every interaction count. In this competitive market, we just don't have the luxury of allowing key opportunities and pivotal moments to pass by without benefit. So we are far more than just a partner that supports top of funnel strategies. And in fact, at Capture, we're there through the entire student cycle and beyond, offering best-in-class marketing solutions combined with seasoned industry experts, helping colleges and universities identify, convert, and enroll the right students and attract the right donors. So at the heart of what we do is the industry's only behavioral intelligence platform, which combines the marketing automation of Engage with the predictive modeling of Apply, Aid, and Enroll, some of which I'm going to be showing you here in just a few minutes. We don't just stop there, though, as we offer additional tools, guidance, and expert knowledge and best practices in order to help you achieve your success. And I can truly say that this was one element of the partnership that I greatly appreciated when I was on the campus side of this relationship. Having that team of experts on Capture's end that could offer guidance and suggestions and best practices made me feel far less like I was making decisions on an island. And I'm sure you've all felt that way at some point in your career. And so in order to get us thinking a little bit, I have 3 interactive questions that I'd like to pose to the group. All right, so question number 1. Does your institution have clearly defined public enrollment and net tuition revenue goals? Right, and so you know, these goals that have been expressed to the campus community beyond just the president's direct leadership team, right? Would you say that only your headcount goals are widely known by your campus community? Would you say your revenue goals only are widely known? Would you say both headcount and revenue goals are known throughout campus, or neither? So we'll give a few minutes or a few seconds, I'm sorry, for those responses to come in, and then we'll take a look. We'll take a look at what everybody says. All right, Sierra, if you want to show the results. So only headcount goals. That's not terribly surprising, right? Even though revenue goals can often be as important, oftentimes throughout campus, I think it's pretty typical that that the headcount goals, those actual enrollment numbers, are the ones that are known. Okay, so question number 2, which general scenario do you feel would be regarded as a successful enrollment year by your campus leadership? So the people at the top, president, the board, the president's cabinet. Would you say that if you exceed headcount goal, even if you fall short of your net tuition revenue goal, that would be considered success? If you meet your net tuition revenue goal, but you miss headcount, is that successful? Or at your institution, do you feel like both enrollment and revenue goals need to be met in order for success to be had? All right, so we will give a couple of seconds here and then share the responses. All right, both enrollment revenue goals to be met would be considered success. So very interesting. All right, well, let's go to question 3 then. And that question is, which general scenario do you feel would be regarded as successful enrollment year by your campus community? So now we're talking about the faculty, the staff, the individuals that you meet every day walking across campus that ask you, how are the numbers? Am I gonna get my raise this year? You know, those types of individuals, and how do you think they view a successful enrollment year by your campus community? All right, so a few extra seconds and we will share the results of this question. Exceed headcount would be considered successful. Okay, very good. And then some individuals also saying both. All right. Well, thank you. Anyone working in higher education certainly is well aware of the challenges that are headed our direction, right? And so let's see, hold on one second. Okay. And likely experience that overhanging anxiety about what's to come in the next 4 to 5 years, right? Changing demographics, waning demand, fewer college-bound students, right? These challenges and more are creating scenarios for college leaders in which there are often more needs and expectations than what is probable or even possible to meet. That anxiety and uncertainty is very real, and it's often at the heart of most decisions being made on college and university campuses today. In last year's American Association of Colleges and Universities survey of over 700 higher ed professionals, 74% of respondents cited financial constraints as the most significant issue affecting their institution. Now, for smaller colleges with under 5,000 students, that number jumps to 79%. Now, considering that this size institution constitutes about 80% of colleges and universities nationwide, this clearly has significant reach. Those at larger universities with enrollments over 30,000 were less likely to report this as the institution's primary challenge, but it was still the top issue for over half of respondents. Overall, 60% of respondents indicated that they are very concerned about the overall financial stability of their institution. So if the majority of higher ed professionals are concerned about the financial status of their institution, we can only imagine what the mindset of a campus's chief financial officer is these days, right? For most college campuses, one of the 2 major sources of revenue is tuition, gifts being the other. On the flip side then, we know that compensation and financial aid typically make up the largest expenses. So we have one of the largest expenses directly impacting our primary revenue stream. This is reflected in the increasing average discount rate nationwide. So for all undergraduates nationwide, the average discount rate grew to 48.1% last year, creating that ongoing scenario in which CFOs are trying to establish budgets based on a declining stream of tuition revenue. So it's understandable when there isn't always a clear answer to the questions that I posed earlier. Now I know what you're all thinking right now. Derek, thank you so much for inviting me here on this Tuesday afternoon to share this happy and uplifting message once again about the career path that I have chosen. Well, you're most certainly very welcome. But don't worry, we're going to leave this doom and gloom scenario behind and focus on resources and strategies that can help support you in your work in the face of these challenges. But I do think it's a very important conversation to have as we discuss the strategic use of financial aid as a recruitment tool, because the overhanging reality of an institution's financial situation obviously has a direct impact on how those college resources are distributed to students. So let's use the scenario of an archer lining up his or her shot. Now, I'm not an archer myself, but I have seen several Robin Hood movies in my life, right? So I consider myself to be somewhat of an expert. And so what if I've never actually shot an arrow? I watched Kevin Costner do it, so let's be honest, how hard can it really be, right? So on a clear day, the target's clear and visible. The archer stands on solid, even ground. He or she knows the wind speed and direction, and they know that if they execute the right draw and release at the correct angle, the arrow is going to fly true and find its mark. So in a perfect scenario, an institution establishes its financial aid awarding policy in the summer or early fall. Historical data is reviewed, enrollment targets are set, scholarship levels and gift percentages are established, and target enrollment and revenue numbers are projected. Flat level ground, just the right amounts of wind and resistance, angles calculated, clear skies. Well, and then things happen, right? The ground around the archer may have changed and is no longer even and stable. The path of the arrow, once clear, is now being affected by rain, high winds, tree limbs and branches, and maybe even a few of those ninjas from the movies that catch the arrow in mid-flight. Oh, those guys are awesome. For colleges and universities, trying to meet enrollment goals in any given year can certainly feel like that as well. After establishing the initial awarding strategy in those favorable conditions, applications come in slower than expected, and that leads to fewer acceptances. Maybe a major visit event was altered by an unexpected ice or snowstorm, and the students who were actually able to attend found the campus newspaper on every table of the cafeteria featuring less than ideal front page articles. Maybe a campus incident gains local, regional, or national attention. And I don't know, let's just say a pandemic hits and reduces or eliminates recruitment travel or on-campus visits altogether. And maybe there's even a few ninjas sprinkled in there. But as all of these things happen, that initial projection from the summer just doesn't look as clear or reachable. So how do we adjust? This is where, as a chief enrollment officer or director of admissions or financial aid, having those clearly defined measures of success can be invaluable. While recruitment efforts are certainly amplified, and we're always going to be doing additional yield strategies and tactics, and as those are deployed, one tool at our disposal will always be financial aid. But the ways in which it might be used, or an institution's willingness to even use that tool, is what often remains unclear. So I would just start with a simple question. Does your institution have clearly defined measures of success? We know we have enrollment goals, right? We know how many students we can house or educate, and we know we need a set amount of revenue to meet our expenses. And every enrollment team in the country is going to scratch and claw to reach those goals every year. But when those goals start to appear out of reach, do you have direction as to how to leverage your financial aid dollars in order to achieve your most critical objectives? Is success at your institution measured by revenue? If so, awarding additional aid dollars in hopes of attracting more students might not be a strategy worth implementing, right? As you might over-award students that would have come anyway, and they would have paid a higher price to do so. Well, in those cases, knowing which students are most likely to enroll might allow for stricter adherence to the predetermined packaging policy, which might then allow for you to refuse more student aid appeals and still meet your institution's metric for success. Or is a higher headcount typically viewed as a successful year, right? More students on campus in the fall leads to additional room and board revenue, increased attendance and energy in classes and events, and then more alums to give back to the college in later years. And more students, even if each is paying less to attend, typically equals more total revenue if you get enough, right? So having projections of the students who would most likely be swayed your direction with a few additional dollars could be the key to a successful year. Now, of course, when asked this question, most presidents, chief financial officers, cabinet members, or board members would probably say both, right? And they might be right, but it doesn't help the decision makers in admissions and financial aid determine how to set strategy. It can be tough, if not impossible, to do both. right? So I encourage you to have that conversation with your team. Ask that question of the president or CFO or committee chair so that you and your team have direction when things don't go exactly as expected. Now, personally, I asked that question often at my prior institution, and the answer I received was pretty fuzzy at best. And I've asked that question to a lot of people over my years in college enrollment, and more often than not, the answer I get is equally ambiguous. I know of situations where a campus brought in strong numbers and exceeded headcount goals, but spent significantly more than expected to bring in that class. Yet from top to bottom throughout the campus community, that year was viewed a huge success. The enrollment team brought in more students, but missed the revenue goal, and years later, they still point to that particular year as one of the best in recent memory. And then meanwhile, that very same campus a few years later saw declining headcount for 3 consecutive years, but managed to increase net tuition revenue per student and met revenue goals. Yet those were considered down years, right? So that particular campus certainly viewed enrollment or headcount as the metric for success. And that's not wrong, right? And I'm quite certain there are institutions that would view those same scenarios in exactly the same way, while others would view them exactly the opposite, right? And that brings us back to the reason we're here. Through predictive modeling like Capture's aid and enroll tools, campuses can have access to detailed and highly accurate enrollment and revenue projections. And on those, they can base some of those strategic decisions. So by building and utilizing a model from multiple data points, predictive analytics can project the likelihood that a student will enroll before, during, and after the financial aid process. So armed with that information, those campus decision makers no longer have to follow their gut alone. They can lean on some data points when determining how to spend those increasingly constrained college resources. Now, I fully realize that the flexibility that a college or university has in aid leveraging varies from campus to campus. Some institutions have significant unrestricted resources and often budget additional dollars each year for scholarship and grant programs. Or for some direct student appeals or professional judgments, right? Other institutions are locked into the original packaging policy with very little to no wiggle room. And then there's obviously a lot of schools that probably fall somewhere in between. So regardless of your institution's location on that spectrum, predictive modeling can be utilized in support of your measure of success. Institutions with more flexibility might see benefit in packaging students as soon in the process as possible, knowing that they can then adjust based on updating projections. But in the case of the latter, predictive models might identify students or groups of students who might be destined for your institution regardless of their award. And that could create opportunities to pull back some of the aid and redistribute it to students who might need more of a push. So while I don't intend for this to be a demo necessarily, I do want to take a few minutes to walk through what one of those predictive models can look like. And no real surprise here, I'm going to show you Capture's aid and enroll models. And this is part of our behavioral intelligence platform. So this is what that particular tool looks like on the Capture side. I could probably spend the rest of this time talking through all of the details of this, but I want to spend a few minutes focused primarily on some key parts of this, right? So with this, we can really get into group dynamics, or we can get down into the individual person, right, to determine how exactly that student could be impacted by financial aid decisions. So if we look at getting down into the individual basis, what I will first and foremost point out is this map, the way that it's set up will show where the admitted students at this particular institution are bunched, right? So this can be very helpful in determining not only how we might be able to utilize additional financial aid, but also are there locations that might be advantageous for particular strategies, right? Are there the greener the dot, the more likely the student is to enroll. So are there travel opportunities? Are there visit events or bus trips, or are there things that we can do to help use some of these brighter green dots to better influence maybe some of the darker blue dots that are maybe less likely to enroll? But what you're also going to see is we can get down to the individual student. And so each individual in the accepted pool actually has an enrollment likelihood. And these enrollment likelihoods are based on hundreds of different factors. One thing that I think really sets Capture's tool apart is that it's not simply based on historical data, right? It's based additionally on behavioral data. So how that student is engaging with the institution. How are they opening messages? Are they engaging online? Those are things that are also factored into this that can impact that enrollment likelihood number. And so you might decide that as we're looking on an individual standpoint, you know, a student with a 91% likelihood to enroll may not be where you want to spend some of those additional financial resources. But as we move down the list and we get into students further down in the 60 or 70% range, those might be students where if we can see an impact in their enrollment percentage based on an additional $500 or $1,000, that might be resources well spent. We can also focus in on group predictions. And so as we look at this, and of course, I'm seeing that my screen is messing with this just a little bit. But what we can do is we can actually see by group, you know, are there subgroups that we're seeing that are performing lower than what we would expect? This particular institution has just over 4,000 admitted students, and based on this model, we're viewing a predicted yield of about 25%, which would bring us in at just over 1,000 enrolls, right? As we admit more students, this number will also grow, but we can also project our discount rate and some of those predicted aid and revenue totals. If we discover that there's a group on here, let's just say maybe you know, high achieving students or something, we can actually spot some of those lags and maybe make some strategy decisions based upon trying to impact those particular groups. Also on here, as I scroll down, one of the things I really liked were some of these charts that are very interactive and show trend lines so that we can see kind of, you know, as our year is progressing, where do we need to land or where do we need to progress in order to stay on pace or stay ahead of years prior. And then finally, the manual aid optimization element of this is certainly something that I want to highlight as well. And so as you recall, these are the numbers that they were predicting, but we can actually play with this just a bit to see how we might be able to impact those enrollment numbers or those predicted enrollment numbers based upon additional offerings. And so let's just say we decided that we wanted to see what would happen if we awarded 500 additional students an additional $2,000, right? So we can move these levers and we can see based upon the model and based on historical and behavioral data, what that might do. We can see we get some additional enrolls, it costs some additional money, affects the discount rate by 1%, but it allows us to make that decision based on data, right? What I also like to do is I like to see and go in and say, okay, let's see how all 4,000 students would be affected by an additional $2,000. We know we're not going to award all 4,000 students $2,000 additional dollars, but I want to see what would happen with each individual student if I would award them additional funds. What would it do to their enrollment? So if I do that, you're going to see, obviously, it's going to make a huge difference to here, but you can download that list of students like I've done here, and it'll actually show you before and after projections. So the projections are here. This was what this particular student was initially. By giving them $2,000 additional dollars, it didn't sway the student a whole lot. So this might not be that student that sees a great benefit out of giving them more money. They're probably not going to turn it down, but it's probably not going to make a big impact on whether or not they choose your institution. But as we move down through here, we can see some of the impact and make adjustments accordingly. It's not going to sway things, you know, huge, you know, 20 to 30% amounts, because there's hundreds of other factors that are going into this. But financial aid is one of those, and you will see some difference. So this just hopefully gives you a snapshot. Again, I could go on and on, but certainly we have other things to discuss. But I wanted to give you a quick view of what that can certainly look like. All right. So Um, with predictive models like Capture's aid optimization tool, you're going to have, that data at your fingertips. It can help you establish strategies at both the group and the market segment level, or it can allow you to even zero in on one particular student. At the market segment level, if your predictive model shows a deficit in high achieving students, for example, right? Maybe you could put your focus on strategies designed to increase yield with that group, perhaps a fellowship program, right, that allows for some additional scholarships or grant assistance, or maybe department-specific scholarships, or maybe you give them additional grant assistance to cover student summer housing opportunities that allows them to do research over the summer. Or maybe, as I mentioned, you can narrow down to, one individual student whose parents have been told from day one to negotiate with every college on their list. And how likely is this student to enroll with or without additional assistance? Are they already likely to enroll and they're just going to take that funding as their cherry on top? Or is it really going to make an impact on their decision? So I'm now going to turn it over to my colleague, Gretchen Bree, who's going to add her own layers of expertise to this discussion. She's going to introduce our very special guest and drive a conversation that will help put these predictions into practice. Gretchen?
Good afternoon. Thank you, Derek. So I just want to talk a little bit about some different uses for the model and some different ways that partners will utilize this information that they're gaining from the model to help move the needle on a student or a group of students. So just a couple of different uses for the model. One tactic to be able to do would be to use the model, or excuse me, yes, to use the model prior to sending out financial aid packages to increase offers of students who may be at a higher likelihood to enroll, but need just a little bit more aid to actually move the needle to make them more likely to enroll. And essentially what it's doing at that point is it is taking dollars from students who are least likely or less likely to enroll and putting that money towards the students who are more likely to enroll, and that group in particular that is more likely to enroll and needs just a little bit more money to move the needle up a little bit to make them even more likely to enroll. Another way that you can utilize the model is, like Derek said earlier, he gave a couple examples. You have a pot of $200. You want to know who, if I give that money to, who it's going to make a difference for. You can input that information into the model, and it will then tell you what students that you should actually give additional funds to based on what their prediction is. A couple other uses of it would be for out-of-state students. So if you're wanting to hone in or dive into out-of-state students and offer more aid there, you could segment those out. You could also segment out by specific major, or maybe even first-generation students if you're looking to enroll a higher number of first-gen students and you know that it's going to take more aid for that group of students to get them there. Couple additional benefits for of using the model before I turn it over to Leanne. Obviously, getting individual student predictions to be able to target those students and know exactly how much more money it's going to take. And then also knowing those students who are not yet deposited but sitting in the most highly likely to enroll category. You can put specific tactics out to those students to help them move the needle on them as well. And then a lot of times we utilize the model for melt prevention tactics. So looking at those students who maybe are deposited but very low likely to enroll, and using that in combination with the other pieces of our behavioral intelligence platform, you can really utilize some deep data to know how active those students have been on your website, how engaged they've been with you. And if they haven't been engaged for a while and they are predicting low likelihood to enroll, that's probably somebody who you would want your counselors to do some melt prevention tactics with. So, and then lastly, just being able to know early in the cycle where you may land, at the end of the year, and being able to get those updates as your enrollment admit pool grows, and having updated predictions even on a weekly basis is helpful in just planning for where it may end up at the end of the year, and helping to know what you need to focus on throughout the spring in terms of yield season. So with that being said, I will turn it over to Leanne Hughes, Vice President for Enrollment Management at Illinois Wesleyan University, who's going to talk to us about some of the tactics that she's actually employed utilizing models.
Thanks, Gretchen, and thank you, Derek. I thought it was really interesting that you chose the arrow analogy to describe what it is that we do in higher education, particularly with financial aid leveraging. I've felt for a long time that it's maybe not shooting an arrow on land, but more like shooting an arrow from outer space and hoping it hits a small target. And as I heard Gretchen speaking, I also was thinking, I think we've done everything that she just described here at Illinois Wesleyan using the model. So let me just begin by kind of telling you the story of how we've began using it here. When I first came, my first year here, I began in October, and we were using a financial aid leveraging company that was telling us that we were on target to hit both our revenue and headcount goals for the year. Being new here, I was still trying to figure out what numbers and funnel numbers meant, particularly to Illinois Wesleyan, because as we know, they differ by institution. And then when we hit May 1, it was not what we were being told was going to happen. And so that first year we had a really low headcount number. And so the next year, and revenue was lower, but not as bad as the headcount. So the next year, using the same company, we went through and I knew a little bit more about the numbers, and we had some more strategic conversations on campus about what those goals were going to be. Decided that we were going to hold on a little bit more tightly to our financial aid awards and see how that generated both revenue and headcount in the following year. That year, we did great on headcount. Revenue was higher, but only slightly higher. And the challenge that, as described, when you're in this environment where everything is changing, whether that be the expectations of a campus, in our particular case, the situation in Illinois was changing drastically. This is a campus that was used to having a much more higher selective rate on our admissions just because of its reputation within the state. And then the state itself has seen a significant shrinking demographic. And so it really required us to be able to continue Derek's metaphor, to be able to control that arrow after it's left as it's going toward the ground. Because as always, you refine your financial aid leveraging strategy at the beginning of the year, but it can be very challenging when you're mid-year and you're seeing that things aren't going exactly the way that you want them to, whether that is specifically within a subset group. Let's say you have a particular major that you're trying to target a revenue and headcount criteria for, or maybe it's your students of color, your diversity rate. It can be all kinds of different things that you can set up within the model that allows you to have some levers of control. And so that third year was when we began using this product with Capture. And I can tell you that it was almost, I should have gone back and looked before the webinar, but I want to say it's within 5 students of what they were predicting, where our actual head count and our revenue dollars came in almost exactly as Capture was predicting it. And so for us, the tool is very, very helpful. We go in and look at it not only from the larger, more global scale of maybe deposits aren't coming in as quickly enough and we're worried overall that we need more deposits, or again, it could be something like you have a particular subset of students. My favorite part is that you can actually go in and pull those names. So if you decide, let's say you need a head count of 10 more students, you can play with those levers that Derek pointed out and say, okay, this is how much money it would take for us to yield that many more students. And then you're able to go back to your president and or your board, depending on what your situation is, and say, okay, we can do this, and it will do this to our discount rate, and it's going to do this to our revenue. Is this something strategically that we want to take on? To me, that's one of the more hidden benefits of it. It allows you to have more accurate data when you're communicating with your presidents and your boards out there about how pulling all these things together really take effect. effect. Because as we all know, we go into the year blind and not knowing what our competitors are going to be doing. The area that I'm in particular is very price sensitive, and so we use it especially for not only the beginning, but as we go through the year and looking at particular, we follow a strategic enrollment plan. So we have subgroups that we really have target goals as well as the overall goals. So it allows us to really get down into the details and have much more control of how that's gonna land at the end of the year. So I'll just say that for us, it's given us a power that I don't think any product that I have ever seen before does. It allows you to not only, using the other benefits of capture and knowing what the students' engagements are like, both long-term and short-term, you can really tie that in with what you're doing with this financial aid model and come up with a great prediction, but also make those course corrections that are just so critically important right now, especially in the higher ed market that we're currently all existing in. And so I think I'm happy to speak if anyone has any questions, Gretchen or Derek, if there's anything more in particular with how we use it here at Illinois Wesleyan. I'm glad to give a little bit more detail about that. But overall, I would just say that the tool for us gives us that level of control of once you launch into your year, if something isn't going the way you anticipated it, you actually have a way to respond to that isn't just guessing, okay, let's throw more aid out at this group, or let's just, recklessly abandon and give everyone $2,000 more or whatever it happens to be. And then it allows you and your president to have more of a conversation about what those goals are. It was interesting, Derek, as you were talking. The other one here, to add the third piece to that wheel with the headcount and revenue, is academic quality. Yeah. And I was just thinking as you did your quiz, every president I know wants all three. Right? I mean, but we all know that if you move one, the other two are going to move with it. And so this allows you to really more accurately measure what those other two variables are going to do than I think any product that I've ever seen out there.
Awesome. Leanne, thank you so much. What's great about this this business that we're in is that you never stop learning. 20 years that I've been in this, and sitting and listening to you, just soaking it up, and that's what I love about this, and it's why I love higher education and working in enrollment. So thank you so much. We may have a question or two here at the end after I wrap up here with a few key takeaways. So hold tight. All right. So again, I hope your time with us this afternoon has proven valuable. If I can leave you with a few key takeaways, I think they'd be these, right? Do your best to identify those critical measures of success at your institution, whatever they may be. Where are you going to get your wins? Be sure to leverage predictive modeling to take the burden off of your decision-making when it comes to financial aid. Use that data to guide your strategies on both the group and the individual level, right? And then finally, be creative in your aid strategies as you put those predictions into practice, while always being mindful of your institutional measures for success. So I will invite Sierra to jump back on and see if we had any questions that came in. Gretchen and Leanne, I guess I'll also invite the both of you to jump back on as well in case we do.
Sure.
Okay, so we did have two questions come in. So the first one is, how do you prioritize counselor follow-up activities to help increase the likelihood of enrollment when there is an adjustment to a financial aid after the initial packaging?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know, Leanne, I don't want to, you may be the person best to speak on this, but I could certainly offer, and Gretchen, you probably have some thoughts too.
Sure. I'll tell you how we do it. I mean, I think it's just using the product. We make sure we have a report that runs from our CMS every week that shows the counselors both the long-term engagement score and the short-term. And then when we run and make a determination of any extra aid that's going to be allocated to a particular student or a particular subpopulation of students using the model, we generate those names out to the counselor so that they can directly reach out with the student. With the changes in NACAC, this is something that's new for us to be able to do. And so for us, we found out early on that holding the extra aid that we had and trying to allocate it later in the year without this tool was not effective for us. And so what this is actually doing is allowing us to do the same things we were doing before NACAC, really, just making aid adjustments if necessary, but doing it in a way that is much, much more strategic. So it really comes in concert with some really great reporting that you generate out through your CMS. And the thing I love about Capture is it integrates perfectly with our CMS. Well, as perfectly as anything can integrate, but there is a little bit of a human part to that as well. But it just generates right in, and those counselors get those reports, and we go from there.
Okay, great. Thank you. And we do have one more question. So the last question is, it seems like enrollment management is now more than ever an art and a science. How have you been able to mix a personalization of the enrollment process while using the data from predictive model for applications financial aid where data can be the driver?
Yeah, I think that's getting into the question of it's still a relationship, right? We're still, I mean, at the heart of what we're doing is building relationships with our students and our families. And so that all the technology, the data at our fingertips really has to drive that relationship part. Students want to select an institution where they're going to feel comfortable, where they're going to, we talk about the fit, we talk about all those various different terms that we use, but really at the heart of it is building those relationships through, those communications, through the visit events, through those off-campus high school visits, and whatever it may be. And I think it has to definitely go, in that order where the data is always helping us better build those stronger and better relationships so students, feel like that the institution is a place that they want to land.
And I don't think it's making us not utilize strategies or tactics that we have in the past. It's not necessarily replacing those. It's just allowing us to be smarter with the strategies and the tactics that we utilize, and who we're really driving what messages to, and how hard we're actually, trying to work a particular student based on what their likelihood is to enroll.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
the only thing that I would add to that is I think once it's set up, this allows you to use the data to be more personal, because you can go in and you can see what websites the student has been on. As we all know, sometimes they come in thinking they want one major, but you may see them on another website spending a lot of time on another major reading it. And so it provides you an opportunity, or a counselor an opportunity to say, you mentioned that you wanted to be in political science. Are you sure that's what you want? Is there any other faculty member that we could allow you to speak with that might help you with your decision? And so it just helps you open up the conversations based on what you're seeing with inside the product. So we are highly personal at Illinois Wesleyan, and so we think of data as a tool to help us with the personalization.
I love that, and I think that's really interesting when you mentioned, is there an additional person on campus that we can connect them with? Because I think we all know that as the further along in the process we get, in admissions, we become more facilitators with the rest of campus. And so when you can see that, like an example, we saw that with athletics sometimes, where a student all of a sudden was searching. We knew that a student we didn't know was thinking about maybe being in athletics or music or something. And all of a sudden now they're seeking out rosters, schedules, information on those now we've got an additional recruiter on campus that we can attach or try to utilize to get that pique that student's interest. So I totally agree that, yeah, how we can gain and pull additional people from campus in is so important. So, all right, Sierra, are those the questions?
Yes, those are the final questions that we have. If anybody in the audience has any more questions to submit, they're more than welcome to do so. And we will have our presenters follow up with you within the next 48 hours. Derek, Gretchen, and Leanne, thank you so much for taking your time to spend with us today. Like I mentioned before, if anybody in the audience has a question, we'll make sure to follow up with that. So thank you again for joining us, and be sure to keep an eye out for the next CaptureCast webinar, April 14th. Bye, everybody. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks.